year. So welcome to members and to members of the public who are joining us this morning. Before we start, just a little bit of your housekeeping that you need to do. So we're not expecting a fire drill, but in the event the fire alarm does go off, please make your way downstairs and out of the building to the far end of the car park. And the fire marshal is tall, who's at the end, so she'll have a jacket, we can follow her. Then just also to advise that the meeting is being live streamed to Facebook and to YouTube, so registered speakers, so that you're aware. And can I just remind members and registered speakers to please use your microphones when you speak to ensure it gets picked up by the stream. In terms of how planning applications are presented, we just had one this morning, and they do follow a very specific order. So the case officer is invited to present his report, followed by the registered speakers, and we have an objector and a supporter and parish council this morning. Each of you have 3 minutes. I think this will advise you the process, but just as a reminder that you'll have 3 minutes each in which to speak. We have the microphone up there, so when I call you forward, it's your turn. And if you just turn the microphone on when you're speaking, it's just pressing the button at the front and then turn it off when you're done. That would be very much appreciated. Members of the committee will be able to question each speaker. It's ultimate committee, just to make sure we understand. When after the speakers, then the officer recommendation will be moved and seconded. This is to let us get into debate. And then after that, members will vote and come to a decision. So hopefully that explains the process. And also just to ask, because obviously every application we consider is really important to everybody, and we want to give our full attention to what is being said. So could I ask everybody to please set your mobile devices to silent, and in the case of members that all their agendas are actually on their laptops. So that's why members are looking at laptops, but everyone else will just park your mobile phones in your pockets, so you're not distracted by looking at them. Just as to who is here, I'll just go across the table and then for me to just explain who everybody is. Mrs. Hall, who's the fire marshal, as I've already said, and democratic services. Then we have Mr. Devon, who's our solicitor. Tony Pierce is the vice chair. I'm Julie Redden, I'm the chairman. Shouldn't sit down at the start, sorry. Ms. Torheimer, who's head of planning, and the planning officer who presents the report and sits there. And in this case, we have Mr. Mathers, who is presenting the report this morning. So we will move to the agenda. And item 1 is apologies for absence, Mr. John.
We have no apologies, Chair. Thank you.
Item 2 is declarations of interest. So in accordance with the Code of Conduct, members are invited to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests, other registrable interests and non-registrable interests, including the nature and extent of such interests they may have in any items to be considered at this meeting. Anybody to declare members? Councillor Sackville.
Just a ward member for that particular area.
Anybody else? Okay.
Maybe you wouldn't declare your ward members.
I can, but I feel it's irrelevant in this case.
Yeah, okay. Item 3, items requiring urgent attention, and there are none this time. So item 4 is the confirmation of minutes of the meeting held on the 19th of April. They can be found in your agenda papers between pages 1 and 6. Members, are you happy that our signing is a true and accurate record? Yeah, okay. In favour, lovely. So we will now move to planning application, which is 3441/21/outline planning, and this is for a outline application for matters reserved for development of 17 holiday chalets and a reception building and associated car parking and amenities at Astra Salvage Yard, Patchpot, Eworthy. So I will hand it over to Mr. Mallows for him to make his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Before I proceed, there's just a verbal update for members. You'll see on page 1 that the recommendation is delegate conditional approval to the head of planning, and in brackets, subject to no objection from Historic England. yesterday I had confirmation from Historic England that they don't think there's going to be any impacts on the scheduled ancient monument. So that would also result in an update on page 3 where it says awaiting Historic England consultation response. I will splice their actual formal response in at a later date. Other than that, there are no verbal updates today. So, as the Chair rightly said, this is an outline application with all matters reserved for development comprising 17 holiday chalets, 1 reception building and associated car parking and amenities. As you'll see on page 1 of my report, the reason this has been called in today by Councillors Mott and Councillor Southcott is that they consider it to be isolated and disconnected development, and as such it's unsupported by amenities and sustainable transport links, which will necessitate the extensive use of the car. And they also considered that the number of units would have a detrimental impact on the local community. So this is the site here for the benefit of those of us who weren't on the site visit last Thursday. It's in Patchacott, 500 metres south of the sort of main built cluster of the hamlet. And it's around 1.8 kilometres southeast of Beworthy, which is named in the local plan, and 3 kilometres southeast of Howell, which is not in our district, but is quite a substantial settlement within Torridge. There's a public right-of-way that runs to the left of the site on the east here where it says Tract. That is a byway that's open to all traffic. And here's a satellite image of the site, just so we can get an understanding of how it's characterised in the local area. We can see this sort of unregulated field patterns, but there's one characteristic across all of them is that they've got quite dense vegetation bounding all fields. And our site here, we can see where my mouse is, and if I go a little bit zoomed in, we can see around 33% of the site is covered in concrete, and that's in association with the unrestricted scrapyard use that operated until 2007 on the site. From 2007, consent was granted for a timber manufacturing site, which falls into industrial B2 use. That use is currently lawful and not abandoned and could resume tomorrow should the applicant so wish. There was also a subsequent application, reference was 1580-16 VAR, and that actually allowed further B1, which is now E, industrial use. And although the entirety of the site isn't concreted at present, with sort of 67% of it remaining quite marshy, as members will remember from last Thursday, full implementation of that still extant consent would see more buildings built on the site, 3 in total, and it would see the entire site utilised for timber manufacturing. So although the entirety of the site isn't currently used, but by that use, it could well be lawfully proceeded. Just looking here at the unrestricted scrapyard site and the fact that it's now in the partially restricted B2 use. I'll go on to the restrictions that are on the site at the moment later when I discuss the principal merits of the scheme. Turning to the site location plan, I must stress, because this is an outline application with all matters reserved, this will form the only approved plan within the red outline. We can see the blue outline extends to the applicant's ownership. So if I go back a couple of slides, you can see the wooded area here is within the applicant ownership to the left of the site, and also part of the dismantled railway line is within ownership of the applicant to the right-hand side of the site. And I'll just stress one more time, this will be the only approved plan. All other plans submitted as part of the application were just indicative of what could be afforded and accommodated for on the site, but those details would be closely interrogated at reserve matters stage. And again, this is just a vision for the site created by the design and project team to show what could be afforded for on the site. And in that vein, matters of parking, drainage and ecology have all been adapted around this maximised layout, but such details would be interrogated further by an officer at reserve matters. So just to run through the site to refresh our minds from Thursday, for those of us that can't remember and weren't there on the site visit, the site has quite adequate access from the local highway, and partly that's because of the former unrestricted scrapyard use and timber manufacturing use. It's a site that has access to accommodate quite intense vehicle movements and traffic, and the character of traffic that would usually go to that site would be sort of articulated lorries and quite large trucks. So on that sense and on that note, a sort of lower intensity residential use doesn't seem to present any highways concerns. This is the well-maintained access tract. I've circled the little man in the high-vis jacket at the end of the road, down the end of the lane you can see there. And it was noted when we were on site last Thursday that this public right-of-way that runs adjacent, because it is a byway that's open to all traffic, there are quite heavy tractor movements and other associated traffic that can move unrestricted along that public right-of-way running adjacent to the site. Here we can see timber manufacturing building is in sort of state of disrepair. It's quite large, bulky, and that is currently planned to be demolished, along with the concrete bunds that we can see here, and all the associated sort of heavy metal fencing that will all be proposed to be removed and dismantled as part of any site remediation. Moving to the edge of the concrete of the site, members remember when I took you to the corner here, we can see that the trees, when I was there in the bleak midwinter, they weren't in full bloom, but now that top corner of the site was pretty well screened by all of the leaves, but you can see through here in the winter there are glimpses to the wider landscape. That's addressed in my report in terms of the landscape officer's views, but through the arboricultural impact assessment and the proposed planting schedule and ecological mitigation that's put in, landscape officers and specialists considered that there would be no objection to the scheme if approved. And on that note of landscape, we can see here an indicative, and again I will stress indicative, but this is the landscape strategy which has been reviewed by our landscape specialist, who is content that as part of the reserve matters we can really interrogate those finite details to do with planting and landscaping, but they were satisfied that that can be comfortably accommodated for as part of any reserve matters. So looking at the key issues, the reason this was called in was because of the sort of sustainability of the site, and I think on that metric the sustainability is okay, but I think it's fair to say that it's not the best. In terms of public transport to the site, if we were to look at bus links, there are quite relatively frequent services at eight times per day, running from 6:16 a.m. till 6:33 p.m. Through to Oakhampton, which is identified as a Tier 1 assessment at the top of our spatial tier and our policy framework. The Oakhampton itself has also recently opened the rail line to Exeter, which provides further sustainable connectivity to a regional hub. But it would, realistically, walking from the site to walk to Medal Cross would take 19 to 20 minutes, and that bus journey itself is a further 20 minutes. So 40 minutes to get into the centre of Oakhampton. It's not insurmountable, it's fairly reasonable, and I think it's fair to say that it does have sustainable transport links through public transport on the bus. Cycling is not insurmountable, but it's fair at best, I think. It takes 48 minutes along the A3079. I'm an avid cyclist myself. I wouldn't feel particularly confident cycling on that route. It's quite a busy road, as we all know. That being said, I don't think it's insurmountable with the National Cycle Route 27 that runs down to Oakhampton. That would take a little over an hour. But if we're looking at that in the context of a holiday site, often families and individuals will reasonably get on their bike and go for an hour, 2-hour bike ride. So I don't think it's impossible that any patrons of the site would cycle to Oakhampton or other settlements in the surrounds. But it is acknowledged that the cycling capabilities of the site are limited and they're not the most favourable, but they are existent. And I think it's worth noting, especially for the reason that this was called in by Councillors Mott and Councillor Southcott on the driving front, it takes 14 minutes to drive into Oakhampton from the site. So, there is a realistic prospect that patrons will be using their car, and our overarching spatial strategy is to discourage car use. But that being said, in the context of the existing extant use, if we're thinking of heavy sort of articulated lorries and truckloads of timber coming to this site, I think they're going to be coming from plantations and depots far and wide. So in terms of the traffic coming to the site from the use that it currently has, they're far more intensive and regular than the sort of once-a-week trips you might expect with a holiday use, with a family going to the shops, filling up their car with all their shopping for the week and coming back to a holiday site. So I think it's reasonable to suggest there would be some dependence on the car, but with the other links, especially with public transport, there are sustainable options to this site. And I think on that basis, the reason my recommendation has come to the decision that I have is based on this fallback. And the question I think for members today really, because we are only interrogating principle, is do we want to see a high intensity, partially restricted industrial use in the countryside, or do we want to see a well-conditioned, well-mitigated and enhanced low-intensity holiday use for this site? And I think it's useful when trying to answer this question that we need to acknowledge that under Class MA permitted development rights, it would actually allow for the conversion of those existing structures on site that we saw on Thursday to residential anyway. And that was because of the application in 2016, which allowed a change from solely B2 industrial to B2 and B1. Last year there was a use class change from B1 to E, and now there is a new permitted development right where you convert under Class MA buildings that fall within E class to residential. So I think we need to acknowledge that should the applicant so wish, they could put in a prior approval application to convert those existing structures into residential. So there's that fallback and the context of the fact that tomorrow the site could realistically and reasonably be used as a timber manufacturing yard. And I think given the current cost of sort of timber imports, especially with Brexit, I don't think the applicants would struggle to reasonably use that site as a timber processing unit. And again, it just brings it back to that key question of do we want to see a high intensity, partially restricted industrial unit for processing and manufacturing timber in this countryside location, or do we want to see a low intensity residential use? And moving on to the policy context of this, I go into in-depth sort of policy analysis in my report, but at a very high strategic level, there is a national policy directive in paragraph 85 of the NPPF at utilising previously developed land. And unlike many other applications that we get in the district for developing greenfield land, this is an opportunity for us to develop a brownfield site, with applicants being very amenable to our policy levers and our suggestions, and sites like this don't often come forward. So in that policy context nationally, there is a thrust towards using previously developed land, especially with the new Environment Act and the new iteration of the NPPF that's coming out shortly. There's expected to be renewed emphasis on reusing and remediating brownfield land. And when we take it down from the national policy level to our local adopted plan, our strategic objective number one is to maximise growth in Plymouth, but it's also to acknowledge the need, this is just the overarching objective, but it's also to acknowledge the need to prioritise the use of brownfield sites and regeneration, and that is a key pointer, number one of our strategic objective. So there's a big thrust for us to be using brownfield land within sort of our overarching policy framework. And as I say, I go into detail in my report as to how there is broad policy compliance when taken in the round and in the whole with that fallback use and the realistic prospect of the PD application coming in to convert the existing structures into residential. And on that note of the existing lawful use and the amenity impacts, which was another reason this was called before the committee to deliberate today, the existing use hasn't been realised for a number of years, so the disturbance to local residents is at present not felt. And I think had it been felt at the moment, and it was actively a timber manufacturing yard, I think maybe there might be a different sentiment in the community about having that timber manufacturing yard right on their doorstep. So if we imagine that that use is being realised today compared to a low intensity residential use, the amenity impacts in my professional view and view of other specialists would be far less than the industrial use, because I keep using this term partially restricted. There are only two conditions on the industrial use at the moment, and that restricts the noise and the hours of operation, which are currently limited to 8 a.m. till 6 p.m. Monday to Friday, and 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. on Saturdays. But there's absolutely no restrictions on the volume or the character of the traffic to that site. So they could have as many articulated lorry movements as they wanted, or heavy truck movements and loads of timber each day going to that site, totally unrestricted, providing they operated within the framework of 8 a.m. till 6 p.m. Monday to Friday, and on Saturdays and no use on Sundays. So I think this application does provide us with an opportunity to further improve the amenities of the surrounds. And again, I know the industrial use isn't currently realised, but if it was to be, I think there'd be a lot more stronger feeling against the current use from the local community. Other key issues relate to drainage, and it was noted when we were there last week on Thursday that one of the trial pits was full of water. So just as an update to members, I did get an update from the applicant and the drainage engineer, and they dug several pits across the site during the tests, and the pits that they found that had high levels of clay that didn't drain well, they found other areas to dig other pits. So all 9 percolation tests that are undertaken in that table by Harkham Environmental Services showed adequate drainage, and those are the results that the lead local flood authority have reviewed, and they are content with all of that data. So that pit that was full of clay and didn't drain, that they moved elsewhere, and the indicative, again I'll stress indicative drainage plan doesn't cover that area that didn't drain. But at reserve matter stage, if it was to be approved, the actual siting location of all the cabins may well be subject to change anyway. So it's just demonstrating that there is a workable scheme and it can be dealt with adequately. But again, that could be subject to change at reserve matter stage if the layout changes. Another key issue is contamination. So the application was accompanied by a phase 1 desk study, and that concluded that site investigation would be required. So that's more intrusive chemical testing and hydrocarbon testing, especially for heavy metals that are in association with the disused railway. Our environmental health team have overlooked that report, and that they've confirmed that they're happy with the recommendations within that report, and I've added those conditions at the end of my report, you'll see. And I think in the context of that national overarching policy of remediating brownfield land and encouraging development of brownfield land, this does offer us an opportunity to remediate a countryside site which is more than likely going to have some contaminants. So moving on to the planning balance, I think ultimately I'll just go back to that question that I asked members, which was, as an authority in a district, do we want to see a high-intensity, partially restricted industrial use in the countryside, or would we like to see a well-conditioned, mitigated and enhanced low-intensity holiday site? And in my professional judgment, and in my view, in the round and in the whole, with the balance of material considerations, I think the conditional approval can be forthcoming because of that extant use and the realistic prospect of it being realised in the short term, and that Class A, limited development rights would allow the conversion of the existing structures to residential anyway, with very limited control from us, or management should I say. And I will stress that I know I outlined the sustainability credentials of the site aren't great. And on that metric, I think if this was a greenfield site and it was just going forward as a holiday site, it would categorically be a no. But we always have to look at nuance and the contextual history of the site, and unfortunately there is a heavy B2 timber manufacturing use extant on this site. We cannot change that. So in that context, I think conditional approval is my recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very comprehensive report. Questions, members? Right. I've got Tract on Tract. Right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your please.
Sorry, did I spark a forest of hands for you, Chair? Ms. Mathers, if I can just check, please. You said about the extant permission on there for buildings to go up. I was unable to make a site visit, unfortunately, but I have passed by the area. We saw from one of your photos that there was a derelict building on site. You spoke about conversion and planning permission for other buildings to go in on there. Would there have been a time limit on those buildings going up? Because looking back through the history of the site, that seems to have been given a long time ago.
Thank you, Councillor Mott. In answer to your question, they're twofold. So the first part of that question relating to the conversion of the building, that building can be converted in its own right under Class MA, but the additional structures I mentioned could be implemented because the previous extant permission that was administered in 2017, part of it was implemented, so that is live, so they could continue to implement the rest of that permission if they so wish. Does that make sense?
Okay, but for conversion, they would have to come back to us for details and permission for that.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. It would be a prior notification that, and we don't have to go through the process. So I don't think it's categorically saying it would get consent, but it is a building that would certainly appears to fall within the category that something to make a prior notification application. And as the committee are aware, prior notification applications are less. You're not looking at policy. You're not looking at policies. Less straight, less onerous than a prior notification.
And can I just check? You mentioned about the pits that some of them were full of water, and that where they found clay and that didn't drain, so they dug more pits. So does that mean in theory that they can dig 100 pits on there and pick the 9 that meet the needs?
As a general principle, it wouldn't be unusual on larger sites for a number of test pits to be dug to see which areas will drain and which areas wouldn't. So yeah, I wouldn't necessarily agree to go to 100, but I would expect to see alternative locations found if there are certain areas that would drain.
But they could effectively cherry pick the results that met their needs.
I wouldn't agree it's cherry picking results because it's finding the areas that drain. So if there are areas that drain, then that is where you would put your drain solution in those areas of work. I don't think it's a matter of cherry picking results. I think it's a matter of identifying the areas of the site where a drain solution is possible.
Councillor Hayworth and Councillor Noyes.
So, I'm just wondering about parking. I believe the blue line indicated there was a larger piece of ground which was in the state ownership. Are we planning to create a parking area somewhere external to this triangular site?
Thanks, Councillor Hayworth. In answer to that, as far as I'm aware, no. I mean, the site outline, the site outline in red. So yeah, the ownership of blue, that is all a copse area, that's a wooded area, and in terms of biodiversity net gain, I don't think that would be touched at all. But the site pertaining to this application, this outline, is just in the red, so parking will be afforded for within that red outline. It's been demonstrated on indicative plans that it can accommodate enough vehicles for 17 holiday chalets, but again, this is all indicative, just to demonstrate that it can be accommodated. It's not going to be conditioned at this stage because at reserve matters, design, scale, bulk, massing, layout will inevitably change where the car parking goes.
Yeah, it's very similar to Councillor Hayward's question. I was trying to see the size of their whole ownership there, because there's a blue line that sort of disappears into the ether, and I was just wondering what the total acreage of the site is. Presumably they could then sell off this site and perhaps develop elsewhere is what I'm getting.
The outline consent only relates to what's in the red line at the moment, so we can't prejudice what may or may not happen in the future.
No, I realise that, but I'm just keen to know the actual size of the ownership of their land.
The applicant may well be able to confirm the blue outline.
Apologies, everybody, for the feedback. I don't know if you're getting that online as well. I'm really sorry. Councillor Pearce, I think you should see.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to thank the officer for a well-written report and also for the presentation this morning. One thing I would like to clarify is this site has B2 use and very light restrictions. There is nothing to stop the owners coming forward with a different manufacturing use other than the timber frame construction work that's already got planning approval for it. Am I correct in thinking that?
Thanks, Councillor. There is a restriction that was put on in the appeal that specifically limited it to timber manufacturing, so it would have to be a timber manufacturing business of sorts. It's not just a blanket-wide B2 industrial use.
Thank you.
Anybody else who may not have seen your hands? Questions? Okay, we will move to registered speakers and I will give opportunity for questions at the end once again. So first of all, I would like to invite Mr. Steve Hiller, who is one of the objectors, I believe, was in okay. If you'd like to come forward and you have the microphone there, and when you're ready, we'll start time for you. If you get to your 3 minutes, I will have to interrupt you on the phone and stop you, okay? Thank you.
Trying to get slightly over 3, but
If you could just make sure you turn the microphone on the front of that. Thank you.
good morning. My name is Steve Hill. I live next door to the site and I'm speaking on behalf of the local community who are in total opposition to it. 6 families and the parish council submitted objections and it is still being considered. Your own designation of our area rightly describes it as sparsely populated, remote and tranquil, with rural hamlets and small farms, totally at odds with this oversized and incompatible development. By starting this action, you leave it open for the owners to return for permission to add amenities such as a bar, restaurant, play area, all normal expansions for tourist businesses when guests realise there are none available. The land sited below this development has already suffered damage from flooding, and as you know, the lower road was previously closed for weeks to repair subsidence. You cannot then tell us that by covering a large part of this site with buildings and directing the runoff into the railway cutting which empties onto that land, it will not cause further damage. Local farmers use the byway daily to access their fields and stock, or to join the site directly, which as the plans do not allow for dog-proof fencing, means that any visitor's dogs have free access to stock with well-known results. Previous applications, both historic and recent for this site and others, using the same road have been refused on the grounds that traffic levels would increase by allowing development. Yet this type of site use must generate far higher traffic levels 7 days a week. As you have seen, this lane is not a two-way highway with white lanes and footpaths, but a single track with field entrances used as passing places. The highway report seems to think it's suitable for families to safely walk to bus stops out on the main road. A busy lorry route to the coast with nowhere to get out of the path of oncoming traffic. Given this route's high-speed through traffic and heavy vehicles usage, I would suggest it's not a remotely safe environment for family cycle trips, even using the favoured e-bikes. We are told these are holiday chalets, yet refer to them as owner-occupier, which makes them second homes. How can you justify adding second homes to an area that is crying out for first homes for local people who would love to go and live where they grew up? We already have 2 young families in the vicinity who cannot stay because there's nowhere for them to buy. Areas that have been ignored are the utilities to the site, in particular the water main, which was only sized and built to service the 5 existing properties. Again, there is only a single phone line which delivers our internet, or 2 megabit, and there is no future date given to us for fibre being provided. In conclusion, if you allow this application to go through, you will be ruining the balance and nature of an area you yourselves have accurately described and designated as sparsely populated and tranquil, turning this into yet another tourist playground and completely ignoring the wishes, wants or needs of the residents. It seems with your sole reasoning for doing so, that in your view, it's better use of the site to be a holiday site than it is to be an industrial site, where we have never seen anyone in and out of articulated lorries.
Stop, please. I'm afraid we're time's up. Thank you. Members, do you have any questions from Mr. Hill at all? that assessment.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned the alternative use. Is that something you think that the residents would prefer an industrial site there rather than those applications?
Well, we all understand that now the site has been bought and it's going to be developed, something has to go there. We do understand that. I disagree with the officer's assumption that it is immediately going to go back to Arctic after Arctic in and out of the site delivering timber. From what I understand, it has now been granted B1, B2 use, so I'm not au fait with all of these designations. But I understood that that broadens the ability to put industrial uses on it. It wasn't just restricted to timber frame use anymore. If that is the case, are we going to have Arctic after Arctic driving in and out of it? Or is this just scaring you people into believing that that's what the alternative is, so it must be better to put this holiday plan forward? It is being used at the moment by a local farmer, contractor, to storage machinery and operate out from. It gives us no problem at all having tractor usage that it has in and out. Because it's a local person, they understand exactly all the other needs of the local people, so if people are moving stock, it's all done very much on a local basis so we all know what's going on. Yes, if an industrial unit of some sort go in there, there is nothing to say at the moment what those units will be, how much impact they will have on us, whether they will be low density or high, whether they will require lots of lorry visits every day. That to me is all speculation. Yes, it is possible, but it is definite that if we have 17 holiday units there, they would be there 24/7 year in, year out.
You've asked the question. Anybody else? Any questions? Councillor?
So it's not of the speed. Can I just get clarity, please? Because I think we're talking about two different things. Because industrial use was mentioned, but Mr. Mathers said that the use was restricted by the appeal to be timber use only. So can we just get clarification over that so that we're very clear about what use is currently there and that it is not open scale industrial use, please?
Okay, we will come to that when we've had all registered speakers, okay? So, any other questions, Mr. Roth? That's lovely. Thank you very much indeed. If you'd like to take your seats again, thank you. So, I would now like to invite Mr. Allen to come to water. Thank you again for using time to turn your microphone on, and again you'll have a few minutes, and so we'll give you a 30-second warning.
Just this button here. So I wanted to start by introducing myself. My name's Callum, and I've owned this proposal site since 2016. And I do appreciate Birchstone Group, which is set to build the site, does leave thoughts of grandeur that is only me that is controlling and building the site. I do want to make it clear that given the go-ahead, this proposal will be built by me and run by me as a business, as I already run 4 holiday units already. So the site was purchased in 2016 and are permission to build a B1 industrial complex that includes 18,000 square feet of industrial units, concrete HGV parking and 24-hour diesel generators and a car park. The new outline proposal sets out to create a visually stunning destination holiday site with award-winning architect-designed holiday accommodation set in beautifully landscaped grounds. I do believe the new proposal improves immeasurably on current permission, keeping the positives and reducing the negatives while remaining within planning policy and retaining no objections from outside advisory bodies. And though vocal on their objections, I would like to point out that using the council's own parish data, 3% of people who rejected the proposal, leaving 97% of people in the locality with no objection whatsoever. It's clear that there's a need for holiday accommodation in the area, with a 17% increase in bookings year on year in the locality. In fact, 5 of the 7 objectives currently run holiday accommodation in Patchcroft, with Mr. and Mrs. Payton running the view, Parish Council of Willowcott and his partner running Bedwell's campsite, and Parish Council of Bolton running Touchner Farmhouse. all have a vested business interest in seeing this application refused. It does lead me to question the impartiality and objection of the parish council when 97% of the parish have no objection whatsoever. But back to the positives. So why does the planning department, every advisory body consulted, and 97% of the people have no objection to this proposal? Because it improves vastly on the current permission and reuse brownfield land. There'll be less traffic with no HGV movement whatsoever. Less noise with no diesel generators, no air tools, no lorries. It's better visually and environmentally with industrial buildings replaced with low-level, low-impact eco-units that control over planting, landscape and ecology. It's well connected to the sustainable transport system network. It's a 600 metre road, 2 metres right at the end of the road that goes down to Patchicott. There's a bus stop. It will have a vastly improved drainage setup and total removal of the concrete area, which makes up 33% of the site, and will be replaced by a permeable surface, effectively stopping fast runoff. There will be installation of conjoined French drain systems to effectively drain and slow and there will be installation of water storage accumulation tanks, which also will reduce water runoff. If this protects 17 private rented sector homes from being converted to short-term rentals, which is already happening in this locality. It promotes healthy tourism and diversifies the local rural economy and creates employment on and off the site, supporting local businesses. It is also next to the long-proposed Camping Goods Food Cycleway, which I'm in favour of as owner of the railway section. Thank you very much for listening to me. Any questions?
That was very time.
Running through it a bit quick, yeah.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Members, do you have any questions? And I just remind us, the speaker made reference of some individuals that moved with reference to platform.
No, yeah, that's cool.
Okay, so Councillor Mills, thank you.
Yes, I wonder if you could clarify the total acreage that you own.
So it's the blue outlined area, so obviously
Yeah, but the blue line goes up the top there.
the top blue line, I think that's a watercourse. So it's the whole railway cutting, so from the bridge at the top where the road goes to the northwest, to the edge of the...
Yeah, no, I understand that, yeah. And also, you're not suggesting putting a shop or anything there, it is just purely holiday cabins?
It's purely holiday cabins. There was suggestion of a shop, but it's...
Not at the moment, then?
Not at the moment, yeah. It was a decision for kind of the future, because it's an outline about. We just wanted to make sure that it was suitable for the site at the moment.
Thank you, Chair. Within your indicative plan, you don't show anything dealing with sewage system and where that water will end up.
So the sewage, so the water treatment plant would be located in the car park area, which is just where the lane comes into the site. So along to the water treatment plant, and also the capture tanks for the water service runoff. Obviously the outflow for the treatment works requires an EA permit. It wouldn't be a problem for this site. But it would divert obviously into the surface water course that would require an EA permit.
Yeah, and that moves downstream to the neighbouring properties, yes?
So it moves into the cutting and does filter out along the cutting. But the reality of where the tank is, we've had discussions with the EA and they have no problem. Obviously at this stage, there's not been it's only an outline plan.
Yeah,
so
I'll just pause you because it's a question you're asking you related to reserve matters, so it's actually putting Mr. Allen in a rather difficult position to ask him to answer questions that as yet won't been put forward. Okay.
We have had informal talks and action.
It's just questions that have been raised within the parish, within the residents of the area, the neighbouring property owners. Should this go ahead, what would be the effects?
Noted, as I said, that will come forward at the reserve matters stage.
I appreciate that,
This is approved outline.
This makes it difficult to judge the outline because we don't know what's really going to end up in there.
Okay. Any other members, any other questions, Mr. Allen? Yes, that's right.
No,
Good morning, sir. A fairly simple one. I think the conditions on page 26 speaks about solely for holiday accommodation. What comes to mind is, will this facility be open 52 weeks a year? And also, what is the maximum time you visit one particular individual staying in the rented accommodation?
I think it's quite hard to define how long someone would stay in holiday accommodation. I just want to clarify that this is a holiday resort and it's not a site that will be sold off as kind of second homes, I guess, where you can buy a lodge. This is an integrated holiday resort with people that a destination holiday resort where people come, they spend their time, have a nice time, they spend their time in West Devon, and they use it for holiday purposes as opposed to, I appreciate that you're trying, you're kind of getting at that it might be used for long-term second homes, and that is not what this site is. It's not how it's designed, it's not how it's supposed to be.
Thank you. That wasn't my suggestion. It's purely to understand how this will be operated. Some are open 50 weeks a year, some are only open 26. Really, the guidance as to how that will be. And obviously, some cannot manipulate the criteria there. With 3 months, someone could stay there for holiday reasons. Do you have any indication for us as to how this will be operated?
I think from the kind of units I run already, there's no one really that spends any longer than a week. And you very rarely get someone for 10 days or 2 weeks. I'd say on balance probably 70% for a week, and then the remainder 20%. For maybe 2 weeks, and then the remaining 2 for a shorter period.
Thank you. That's
Just following on from Councillor Devon. So I understand this property. I was just confused. You retain ownership of it. It's not something that you're going to build and sell, and somebody, a family will own it and then come back again and again. We're looking at more of where people, booking.com, wherever they go on, book for a week and then go back home again. And not, that would alleviate the fact that people are staying there for months at a time then.
Yeah, exactly.
So you would always retain your intention to retain title to it.
Oh, 100%. It only works as a scheme, as a resort scheme, as somewhere nice to go for your holiday, as a nice holiday attraction if you retain it.
That's what I thought I'd read.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Moss.
Yes, that's raised another issue in my head. During the winter time, presumably you don't expect so many holiday units to be occupied. Have you any suggestion what you would do with the empty ones during that period?
Yeah, so of course in the winter there is obviously less people going on holiday. You have to be a bit more selective with your nightly rates, I think, and charge them. So at the moment I have an 80% occupancy rate, which is fairly good. But that obviously means that in the summertime it's a little bit higher, and in the wintertime the charge and the occupancy is a little bit lower. But obviously there will be less occupancy in the winter. There's no denying that, but I would be quite confident that in that location, in how they're designed, and how they're supposed to be, and how they will look individually, it would be a very nice site, I think, if we went out. They won't have any problem with that.
In the winter. Okay.
Thank you. Any further questions from this Charlie? No, thank you very much. You really did tell me that. That'd be grateful. Thank you very much. Okay, then we have Reading Parish Council have submitted a written statement which Ms. Swart will read out. Thank you.
General views on compliance with relevant planning policies. The traffic use suggested in the application is contradictory. There are inaccuracies in the description of the access road, which is narrow. The application would involve additional traffic using the lanes, which is inadequate in terms of width and alignment. The application site is also remotely situated, not served by public transport, in other words, sustainable village, and the proposal constitutes undesirable sporadic development in the countryside. The adverse impacts on the development on the local community. This development will increase the population of the community by approximately 3 times and contributes no benefit to the community. The effect on the surrounding environment and drainage from the site will exacerbate the current problems. For example, the road has been closed recently for 3 weeks due to undermining caused by flooding. There are also concerns about current ground contamination at the site. In addition to the noise from the increase in traffic and from the site itself, there are concerns regarding livestock surrounding the site and the possible safety issues with dogs on site and poor fencing. The development would constitute a nuisance from not just noise but light, dust and vibration, etc. Problems with site access and parking. The amount of traffic that will be created at the site from an additional 78 people at full capacity, including the delivery vans that are suggested for groceries, will put excessive pressure on the inadequate single-track rural road network in the community. The following previous proposed development here was turned down to the inadequate local access. Application 2479/2001/Oakham. Correction of 10 dwellings, outline application, including highway junction improvements at the Ashford salvage yard. In summary, Beworthing Parish Council believe the local services and infrastructure are not equipped to cope with such a large, dense overdevelopment. As highlighted, are no local amenities such as shops, post office or pub. The area is rural residential with no immediate tourist destinations. 12 miles to Dartmoor, 18 to Bude, 35 to Bodmin, 14 to Lawson, all out with cycle destinations. Although Beworthing is central to attractions in Devon, this would require suitable and sufficient transport infrastructure. There are no trains, buses or integrated cycle routes. Finally, consideration must be given to the increase in the demand on the electricity infrastructure from the additional accommodation, and that the distribution network operator is consulted thoroughly. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. And then moving to the ward members, we have 2, and I understand, council staff, but it's going to be reserved for debate, is that correct?
Yes, because basically everything I was going to say has been said, so no point in me saying anymore.
Okay, thank you. And I know that Councillor Morrison is speaking debate. Okay, I'm just going to call for a brief recess until 11:05, we've adjourned to 11:05, just to enable Mr. Ryan and Mr. Devon just to have a bit of consultation, just to clarify issues around the restricted use question and also the conditioning of holiday lets against second homes. Okay, so we will, if you could just sit tight and stand in please, and we will get going again at 5:30. Live stream just to be paused for a moment. Thank you. So thank you very much. Welcome back, everybody. And thank you for your patience. We had a couple of questions that sort of arose, particularly from the very helpful information provided by both the objector and supporter, actually. So we just wanted to get some clarification on that. And I will ask Mr. Weiner if you can. So the two questions, particularly were relating to the discussion of it being the exclusive use for that position, and also regarding whether there could be conditioning. We have already got conditioning in there in terms of holiday lets, but whether there's a way of renting occupation as second homes to ensure the retained as holiday lets rather than somebody just purchasing individual units and then being second homes. Mr. Weiner.
Thank you, Chair. The first thing I can clarify is, and I'll just go over this, so in 2007, is when permission was granted for the change of use of former scrapyard to B1 and the erection of new buildings. So that's the base permission that Mr. Mathers was referring to. And there was a restrictive condition, condition number 10, that the premises shall only be used for the construction of timber components for the building trade. However, in 2016, there was an application to vary condition 10, so that specific condition, to allow a change of use to B1 and B2. That was approved in 2016. So the extant permission is for B1, B2, is not restricted for timber products. There is, however, a condition saying it can't go from removing the permitted development right to go from B1, B2 to B8. So it is a B1 stroke B2 use, but it is not restricted for only the timber products. So any other use that was formerly within B1, B2, because that's somewhat complicated by the new use classes orders, and they've been wrapped up into Class D. But it is not, fundamentally, it's not restricted for the production, manufacture of timber products or building trades and open-ended, as most industrial commercial consent sites open-ended for B1 and B2. So that's, I apologise that we didn't make that more clear at the beginning, but hopefully that's the clarity you're seeking. The second question that's come up is around what restrictions can you put on to ensure that a holiday unit is a holiday unit and is not in effect, a second home that isn't being used for holidays. That's been a dilemma for a number of years, and there isn't, I'm sure Mr. Fairbairn coming in, correct me if I'm wrong, there isn't a nice, easy answer to this, because you can't define easily or at all what a holiday is. For most people, a holiday is normally you go away for a week or two in the summer, but not for everybody. I can think of a number of people who their holiday is they go to Spain for 4 months in winter, and but they're still saying that is my holiday. So it is really difficult to define. I think what you're seeking to do is make sure it's a genuine holiday use, so that it's occupied all weeks of the year, and not just occupied by one family when they want to come down, so it's not a second home scenario. I have seen conditions used in the past where the authority has restricted the number of weeks a particular individual or group of people can occupy a particular unit. That's normally for either sort of 6, 8 weeks, so that it isn't just used as a second home. So that is something members could consider, and it wouldn't appear to conflict with the business model that the applicant said to you, where I think it was 70% are there for a week or 2 weeks. Sorry, 70% are there for a week, 20% are there for 2 weeks, and the remaining 10% are there for less than a week is my assumption. So if there was a restriction that no more than one group is there for 6 weeks in any one calendar year, it wouldn't appear to conflict with the business model that's put in front of you. So hopefully that advice is helpful.
Thank you. Did you need to add anything to that, Devon? Is that?
No, Chairman, I agree with Mr. Lawrence.
Thank you. Were there any other questions that arose? I think, would you want to ask that sort of people?
Thank you, Chairman. Something was raised by the objector about the stop-through fencing, or not having stop-through fencing. I don't know what town officers feel, whether we should, or could, if this is approved, whether we could put that down as a condition.
Councillor, I was trying to, at the time, I was trying to find the answer to the question around the use. I may have got this wrong. My impression wasn't so much it was stop-through fencing, it was more fencing to stop dogs from the site going into the stop-through, a standard wooden stop-through fence wouldn't stop that. I don't see any problem with us putting a further condition or recommending a further condition if members wanted to approve this, that boundary treatments were, a schedule of boundary treatments was submitted to and approved by us prior to the and those boundary treatments installed or erected, whatever the correct word is, prior to the occupation. My understanding is it's more around family pets and people living there getting onto the site and worrying stop rather than stop getting onto the site, because I would be astonished if any site owner didn't have a stop-through fence to stop any stock getting onto the site, but I understand that, so I think it was the other way around.
It was, yeah. Yes, it was, thank you. The other item, I'm looking further down the road, should we not approve this today and it goes to appeal. I'm wondering if we can put a condition in to, that there is some upgrade to the internet to should it at some point in the future be approved, or even today, that there is benefit of an upgrade to the local internet. We heard from the gentleman who spoke, who said the internet is dire. I'm just wondering if this would be, if this is approved, it does support the residents in having an upgrade to their IT.
I have to say, one of the great advantages for me when I go on holiday is I actually try and find somewhere that hasn't got internet, so that people can't get all the this is bad enough when they can. Can I mull that one over? I mean, there is, and I can say this with some degree of confidence, because we have certainly, the other authority I currently work for, we are inundated at the moment with applications, with rollout of broadband to hard to get places where they're coming in with lots of applications for telegraph. It's effectively broadband by wire, not fibre or not underground fibre, through telegraph poles. So I know that it is being rolled out, and when it is being rolled out there, it doesn't appear to be just those people are paying for it. It's being rolled out. I probably want to have a quick conversation with Mr. Devon. I think what you're actually asking, I think, after this, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that if the applicants choose to pay for broadband to be installed, but when they do that, they make the connections available for local residents, is effectively what you're asking for. I don't think we could insist as part of the condition that they have to do it, because I think in terms of, I don't think we can insist that they have to provide broadband to their site. Because if they choose not to, then I don't see them say you must have broadband for this particular use. Mr. Devon, I'm starting to flounder.
Very likely. I think if you go back to the test for what is a valid planning permission, if you try and to get what you want from them, illustrated a condition about providing internet and making it open to local residents that should you decide to install it. I don't think it would tick any of the boxes. I don't think it's enforceable. It would be difficult to say that it serves a planning purpose or that it's actually necessary to make this development acceptable in planning terms. And I think also you're lacking a policy justification for it. There's no policy in your local plan that would support such a condition. So I think ultimately it's not a condition that you could lawfully impose.
Thank you. Members, do you have any other questions before we make the recommendation? Yeah. Okay. Well, we've heard about additional conditions of no more than one family group to occupy for more than 6 weeks, and the additional one regarding boundary treatments being submitted for approval to install prior to occupation. So with those additions, I will move recommendation to delegate conditional approval to head of planning. Is there a second, please? Yes, I did. Delegate conditional approval to head of planning.
I did a second, Chairman.
Member Speak on number 8. Mr. One, do you want to answer?
I'm really sorry, Chair. I thought at Mr. Knight's presentation, the recommendation on the papers is delegated approval subject to no objection from Historic England. We have now received no objection from Historic England. So it could, I mean, so I'm happy that those conditions can be put on and they're quite clear and don't need to come back to members. So I don't think it needs to be a delegated approval. I think it is a conditional approval subject to those two additional conditions. I don't think it needs to come back from, I think it's a member decision here and now rather than delegated to me.
Okay, so do we need to remove that then? Yeah, okay. Well, these members, need to check that before I make the recommendation. Okay, so it is truly to delegate conditional approval subject to those additional conditions. Second that.
I would a second, Chairman.
Thank you. Members, technicalities. We are in debate, members. Who wishes to go first? Councillor Mills.
Yes, I do believe that we've got plenty of holiday lets in West Devon. The economy of them is going to go down once in the next few months, perhaps a year or so. People return to going abroad and are happy and confident to go abroad. So I'm not in favour of any more of them, especially a large number like 17. There aren't any facilities close by, meaning more car journeys, and often with these holiday lets, there's 2 cars for each item, which is twice as many as it used to be. So I'm not happy to support approval.
Thank you. Yes. Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Chair. Since there's a reluctance of hands this time. Mr. Mathers states that the application broadly meets the aims of the spatial policies 1 and 2, and yes, it does, but only in the very broadest of that sense. The reality is that it's extremely unlikely that a visitor to the area will arrive to the site after a train journey and a cycle ride with all of their needs for a holiday for a week or 2. The reality is that this location will necessitate the use of a car. Previous applications have already been reduced for housing on this site, and there's no infrastructure or amenities to support the significant increase in the population of the area, albeit on a temporary basis. He also goes on to state from the manual for streets, I believe page 45, now that I found it, and that statement that he's quoted describing walkable, walking offers the greatest potential to replace short car trips. Yes, that is true. However, I feel that that sentence is taken out of context because the manual actually refers to the walkable neighbourhood, where it's typically characterised by having a range of facilities within 10 minutes up to about 800 metres walking distance of residential areas. And I would suggest that that's more suggestive of if you're popping to shops for goods, for example, rather than walking up to the nearest bus stop, which would then necessitate a journey, shopping, lugging all of that back. Cycling, as he admits himself, along the A3079 is a fast, busy main route and would prove to be an interesting experience. It then joins the 386, which is also a main route for haulage and would not be tackled, I would suggest, by a family readily. So therefore it's more likely that the car would be used to take the cycles, etc., to the cycle track and beyond. I do believe, however, that these are isolated developments. I know that differs to the officer's report, and I feel that it doesn't meet the needs described under TTB 26.1. One car trip to arrive on site with all of the goods and things would be reasonable if entertainment and other amenities were available on site or within the immediate area. They're not, therefore this would necessitate numerous car journeys on a daily basis to visit the wider area. I'm struggling because I can fully understand the need for some sort of development on the site, some sort of use of the site, and the use described by the applicant does suggest an improvement, but on balance I feel that I cannot support the application as it stands at the moment.
Okay.
When I looked at this really early on last night, and I kept writing down access, and whatever happens on there is going to be an access problem. We then go back to highways, and highways yet again, and we're told on between times if they don't object with, if we refuse on that basis, that there is an option for appeal, and we want to be very favourable. Mr. Hillier touched something that I was looking at. I wrote on here. First houses, obviously, where my ward's exactly the same, where they're losing youngsters because there isn't affordable housing. Having said that, whatever you build on there, whether it's affordable housing, the problems are going to be exactly the same. I do agree with the gentleman there of the change of use, so I'm minded at the minute to go with the opposite recommendation. I do on that one, just to be clear.
Thank you. Anybody else? That's right.
That seems okay. Thank you, Chair. Yes, I listened to really what has been said by the members, and I really generally most of what they've said. I would add that my concern is how people are going to get to this site. Having driven around the area, because my sat-nav seemed to find where the site was, and I got it a little late. I've driven around the whole of that area from probably 5 or 6 miles, and the roads to me were, first of all I thought, I hope nothing's coming the other way, because there's no way I can turn around going down here. The roads had a lot of mud on them, the farm, which you would expect in a farming area. And to really try and apply what legislation guidance we have, I don't really believe people can cycle around that site. I don't believe people can walk around there. And I really think it is going to require car vehicle uses to get there, to also to travel around, and also for vital shopping. So I think on that, I feel I cannot support this application. Thank you.
Thank you. That's Bessie.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a very difficult application to deal with, I believe. I have some major concerns which members have not picked up on, and I think we need to look at this in case it does go to appeal, if you do refuse this application. We have to remember that it is a brownfield site. I have to disagree with one of the other members who said that people will be going off on holiday abroad and won't be holidaying in this country. I think it would be the reverse. Given the cost of air tickets now, which I've experienced the last few days, it's quite a shock. And I think more people, as we move into a recessionary period, more people will be holidaying in this country. I would hate for members to hang their hats on a refusal for the isolated area. When you see the number of holiday lodges that are being constructed at Roadford Lake, which is far more isolated than this one, I think the planning inspector would look at it possibly in an unfavourable way and try to support us if this were refused. And in normal circumstances, if this is a greenfield site, it would be thrown out, wouldn't be considered. But we have to realise it is a brownfield site. Central government's idea is and directive is that brownfield sites should be developed. And I think we're in a very difficult position here, and you really need to think very carefully on your decision on this one. I accept that it's going to require quite a bit of car use for people to use this site as part of the accommodation, but we have to get the balance right, and I think a lot of people will be looking for places that, as Chief Planning Officer or Head of Planning said, that he likes to get away from the internet. I think there are a lot of people in this country who like to go to isolated areas where there is nothing. So you need to think very carefully, because I do feel that we need very good reasons to refuse this, and I don't think that people forward so far would stand up and would put our officers in a very difficult position to defend this appeal. So therefore I would be fully supporting this recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Leach.
My concerns with this one may become relevant the amount of reserve matters, and they're very important reserve matters of density, drainage, conservation, all of those very important issues I feel should have been addressed and come to the committee at this stage, so we know exactly what we know what's being proposed, but exactly what might be doing. The other thing I have issues with is sustainability. We should talk about other planning applications, where we've had similar planning applications for one or two farm conventions, which have fallen through sustainability. And then no further away from outcomes and other conversations than this one. So I don't think that we've been consistent in looking at sustainability. So at the moment I'm talking about on the fence with this one. I understand that there are other alternatives that could come to the site if we don't go to this one. But I don't think I've got enough information for the reserve matters site to say yes to.
Thank you, Chair. I think, like Councillor Leach, I'm actually undecided. I mean, 3% of the local residents rejected something, in my opinion, is a large figure. I understand the reason for their objections. I'm concerned, as Councillor Pearce is, about how robust a material reason for refusal would be. And I don't feel wait till they to finish my full length report.
Thank you, Chair. This whole thing, to me, is difficult because I can see the problems that the local community have with it. I can also see the side of the developer and why they want to do it. I'd have been far happier if this had come forward as a full application rather than outline, so we could see exactly what they want to put in there, and it'd be much easier to determine what it was going to be, end up as. The indicative plan, to my mind, is overcrowded. I'm very, very concerned about drainage, the effluent side of drainage, because it's going to end up in neighbouring property. I can't make my mind up on this one at all at the moment. It is very, very difficult. It'd be far better if it was a full application which we really knew what was going to go into that site, rather than just an outline application which leaves it open to various things changing reserve matters. I can't make my mind up at the moment.
I need to very quickly just remind members that it is outlined, and I understand the thoughts and the concerns that there are around reserve matters, but that really cannot be taken into account because that is something that will come forward with reserve matters. So we need to completely focus on what is before us at the outline stage. Is this okay? Anybody who hasn't spoken who wishes to do so? No. In that case, members, we are looking then to take this to the vote. So for those of you who are still uncertain, you don't have long to make up your mind. And just as a reminder that the recommendation is for conditional approval with the additional conditions that we added. So all those in favour of the officer's recommendation with the additional conditions, please show.
That's five, Chair.
And against?
That's five, Chair.
It's Chairman's casting vote, so that is carried. Thank you. Thank you for all your contributions to the speakers. They really have been very important, and as you can see, this has been a very close debate on this one, very balanced, which goes to show that this is smooth as well. So thank you very much indeed. Okay, we will now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is item 6, the planning appeals update, which can be found on pages 33 to 34. Just reference trying to get it all up. When you're ready, over to you.
I'm going to stop and close that. We have success. Okay, members, I'll briefly run through the appeals. If anybody's got any questions on any individual one, I'm happy to stop me on that one before I just go through to the next one. A number of, for a change, it's a list of appeals with decisions rather than just lodged for a change. But while I think I'll just give you a little bit of information, I saw some stats in the planning press recently where I've got a lot of agents quite aerated that at the moment the inspectorate have published that the time it's taking to determine appeals on average where they've gone to a hearing is now 104 weeks if it's hearings. And so I did some digging looking at, okay, what was in March, they published their performance of appeal decisions issued last year. And on average, so the average appeal, written reps appeal is between 44 and 54 weeks. So the amount, so when you get a start letter through, if you get any people in your ward who have actually lodged an appeal or have objected to an appeal, I can't say categorically they're all going to take that amount of time, but they do appear to be taking around 40 odd weeks for the majority. Some are coming out quicker, some are coming out a lot longer, but the pins I think have got a little bit of a either a backlog or just more work than they can cope with. So just as an I must admit I was a little bit flabbergasted. It was 104 weeks for hearing. Hopefully that's coming further forward. Anyway, so the first appeal on the list, application 4154, that was a change of use barn to a dwelling. The inspector took the view that the design and the materials suggested would lead to the over-domestication of the site, which was highly visible and would be an incongruous feature moving forward. So that was I think the key part of the refusal. But they said it wasn't in a suitable location and costs weren't awarded. But I think the key issue there was the design and materials. The second one, which I'm expecting some comments on, because I suspect it's 21 officers nil, is the outline applicant. The second on this is just nil lodged. So the Baker Estates application, Lamerton, where the inspector's key issues and the inspector's debate was very similar to the debate we had in the meeting, where the inspector said the appeal site cannot be said to be physically remote from Lamerton, but the area southwest of the main road is, I think it was intrinsically rural in character, where built development does not dominate, and therefore it took the view it does, whilst it's not physically remote, it does like lay outside of the built area, and therefore was unacceptable in policy terms. Given that was a committee decision, contrary to officer recommendation, if there are any questions, I'll happily answer them now. I might have a comment later on that, but once after the meeting. This does seem to be Lamerton heavy, because they're popular with both Lamerton as well. The application of 3981, if memory serves me right, I think we've had appeal decisions here before. I think it's a regular site, and typically the site is outside the settlement. It's not obviously compliant to a straightforward refusal, and the inspector agreed. The householder application, Green Hill, Lamerton, the inspector concluded, as officers did, that the tall, solid mass of the proposal would be overbearing to the occupants and neighbours and would result in a significant loss of evening sunlight. So it wasn't the principle that simply the impact on the neighbours. And the last two, which are both TPO appeals, in both cases the inspector considered that the tree makes a positive contribution. The works would have moderate harmful effects, but harmful effects nonetheless. And the application didn't provide any overriding justification for that, to mitigate that moderate harmful effect. So they were both refused. So now I have to answer the questions.
Any questions now, Mrs. Sandy, please?
I'm really pleased with the last two, well, with all the appeals that have been dismissed, but the two last ones I think are important, because trees are a significant part of our landscape, and in some areas there's been, over the last couple of years, there's been significant removal of trees, of mature trees where they have no TPOs, and I think it's important that when our tree officer makes a decision on an application, that it is supported by the planning inspector. which has happened in these two cases. So I really welcome that.
Any other questions on any of these? Okay. So that then takes us on to item 7, which is the update on the undetermined major applications, pages 35 to 36 in the agenda papers. And as three, anybody has any questions on how they are progressing rather than any merits. Councillor
The Plymouth Road application, when are we going to see the section 106 agreement?
It's a very good question, and it's still work in progress. The negotiations are continuing, and I understand the parties are continuing to meet and discuss the matters. But it will be brought to you as soon as we possibly can.
And also the Hazelden application, is this now coming to committee?
Probably. I don't know whether you've responded to the last email from the case officer, so I wasn't probably on anymore.
I've responded to all of them several days ago.
In which case, if provided the criteria of the scheme delegation has been followed, then yes, it will be coming to committee.
No, I will make comment when the meeting progress.
Any further questions on this? No. In that case, it looks like we have completed our agenda. So thank you all very much, everybody. Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, everybody, for your time. If